Okay, I think we're back and we're good to go. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this Design Matters seminar series. This is number 7 months in a row. I never thought we would get to this point, but I'm really pleased that we have. And actually, this has become one of the highlights of my month. It began back in November of last year as a bit of a dread. I wasn't quite sure how these would go, but I'm delighted with the quality of the discussion that we've had and the quality of our speakers as well, and also the audience participation. So thank you for continuing to engage. As with all of the previous sessions, I am recording this. It will be posted up on YouTube, and I'll share the details of how to access that as soon as I've got it ready. It'll probably be early next week by the time I upload it. This particular session this month, we have a focus on design for responsible innovation, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome Dr. Molly Briggs and Lisa Mercer from the School of Art and Design, University of Illinois. They will do a much better introduction to themselves than I can, but we're really lucky to have them with us. They're doing some really exciting work over in the States around design for responsible innovation, and mixing that with a whole range of different academic research and teaching. And it'll be really interesting to hear some of their experiences and insights and have a discussion with them. Next month, I will mention this at the end, but next month we have a focus on design for humanitarian and international development, and I hope also design for policy, but I haven't quite got that one confirmed yet. So we've got a couple of speakers lined up for next month, and it should be good. That's on the 18th of June, and we're back to UK time 9 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for coming at this adjusted time slot. Welcome Molly, welcome Lisa. Really delighted to have you with us. I'm just going to hand over to you now. Listen to what you've got to say and then help facilitate a discussion with the audience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction, Nick, and thank you for the opportunity to present what we've been doing at the University of Illinois. I'm going to go ahead and make sure you can see my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, that's coming up perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. My name is Lisa Mercer. I'm an assistant professor of graphic design and design for responsible innovation at the University of Illinois. My research is focused on the development of tools that prompt conversation and design interventions that disrupt the status quo of the design research process.
And I'm Molly Briggs. I teach alongside Lisa, so I'm a assistant professor of graphic design and design for responsible innovation, and I'm currently the graduate program coordinator. My research is about the intersection of popular immersive media and the shape of public space in history and in the present. And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So I'd like to begin today with a land acknowledgement, a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. For settlers, the act of performing a land acknowledgement is a fundamental step towards reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and settlers. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. We acknowledge that we are in the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Muscogee, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. We would also like to invite each person to search if they are on any historical claims to the land each person is on. This is a website called Native Land where people can search for information about the lands they are currently on. This does not cover every territory, but it does provide a good amount. People can search their address or the name of the city that you're in, and it will show you local nations that had historical claims to the land they are each currently on. To ensure that we provide a holistic perspective on the development of the programs we're talking about today, we wanted to make sure to provide context on our campus, our college, our school, and our program, each being nested within each other. I mentioned in our land acknowledgement that we are a land grant institution. There are 112 land grant institutions in the U.S., and each institution receives a percentage of federal money from the government. President Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act of 1862, which distributed over 10 million acres of indigenous lands to develop research institutions in each state. Each university would be focused on research, higher education, and it would extend that education into the local and rural communities. So we're located in the middle of Illinois, about 2.5 hours south of Chicago, 2 hours west of Indianapolis, and 2 hours and 45 minutes northeast of St. Louis. This location gives us prime access to rural communities. We are also one of the 131 research Tier 1 institutions in the U.S., which indicates the highest level of research being conducted on our campus. Our institution has just over 50,000 students, with approximately 34,000 in undergraduate studies and 16,000 in graduate studies. We have over 15 college and instructional units, including social work, humanities, education, engineering, and computer science. And one of the reasons we believe students come to study with us is the opportunity to take courses with different disciplines. This allows them to partner their interest in design with other academic units. We often recommend students in our graduate program have a thesis committee member be from an area of interest outside of our program and is more specific to the topic of their research. We believe this further encourages our students to look at design from a more collaborative perspective. We have 8 different cultural and resource centers to provide support for students who identify with the historically marginalized community, and we are rated as #1 for campus for students with different abilities. Our programs are in the School of Art and Design, which is a part of the College of Fine and Applied Arts. We are also recognized as one of the largest programs, not only in our school, but in the college. The college is comprised of 4 departments and 3 schools, the School of Art and Design being one of those schools, and has over 13 majors and 3 minors. The graphic design program has changed over the past 5 years, and we believe the reasons for this is a change of culture on our campus and the conversation on design. Part of this culture change was a shift of mindset on the practice of design at the university level, with the introduction of the Siebel Center for Design, which is located right next to our building on campus. In this rendering, the School of Art and Design is the building on the left, and the building on the right is the new building for Siebel Center. The center's inaugural director, Rachel Zwitzky, is a former executive director of the international design and consulting firm IDEO. The intention for this building is for students to have a space where they are able to focus on human-centered design, and a space that is meant to be as versatile as possible for students to work together from multiple disciplines. The conversations around the need for the Siebel Center for Design was focused on the questions of who designs, who should use the word design, and who gets to teach design. Our undergraduate graphic design program has seen a growth of over 200% in the past 6 years. And each year, our incoming students' numbers show no signs of slowing down. In order to meet the needs of our growing undergraduate program, many new faculty have been hired, which has been an exciting stage for our program given that most of the faculty are now new. This has been a catalyst to drive change to meet the demands of the students and to work collaboratively across campus on our research. Many programs outside of our school and our college are looking to collaborate with our undergraduate and graduate programs. They are hoping their students can take our courses, but given the number of students we have in our program, it has been next to impossible to open any seats up to students outside of our program. Thankfully, our faculty have responded with an interest in the development of courses that we are hoping will start to meet the needs of students across campus. Many colleagues across campus also want to work with each of us on research, and it was important to ensure that those collaborations were not focused on the certain practical skills of a graphic designer. The interest of our faculty is diverse, but there is a common thread in our research with a focus on design-led social innovation. sustainable design, social impact, and a critical discourse on the practice of design. We each come from different areas of design and making, including graphic design, industrial design, interaction design, interface design, experience design, service design, architecture, and illustration. The changes to our programs were results of the interest of our faculty and their interest in ensuring the courses we teach showcase that knowledge and research. Initially, we started by adding courses and making changes to the undergraduate program, but of course, this fed our growing interest of making changes to our graduate program and MFA in graphic design. When working with graduate students who originally came to campus to study a more traditional practice of design, this was a big change for them. We made sure to invite scholars from varying institutions and research paths to discuss the wide variety of perspectives on human-centered design, and even perspectives that conflicted with one another. These students underwent this change with us, and because of it, embraced the more contemporary practice of design, and their final thesis documents really represented that change in our program. We were attracting students who wanted to study the more traditional practice of design, because that's what we were known for. It became clear to us that we needed to change the name of our program to attract students who were interested in doing the work our faculty are interested in, and more specifically, working with students who are interested in engaging with the design process as a form of research. Our program needed to make the shift toward addressing the increasingly complex systems-level problems present in systems, artifacts, and experiences, ensuring we are providing students with the information and space, intellectually speaking, to think critically on changing systems and complex social issues through design-led social innovation. The challenges we came up against in making these changes aren't any different than other programs in the United States. There is a resistance to changing the traditional pedagogy of design and moving toward a more contemporary practice of design. While the undergraduate curriculum is still teaching the skills for a graphic designer, many of the new courses were running parallel tracks of teaching skills and a research process. Moving from the practice of design from a singular discipline, graphic design, into a focus on the research process that encouraged our students to explore different areas of design and different ways of making. One example of this is in our EDGE course, Ethics for a Designer in a Global Economy. Students are asked to consider the ethics in the work we do and the processes we apply to our work. This is one example of an undergraduate project that resulted from the EDGE course. Students are led through the design research process with prompts that require they think through the reason of why they are making specific choices and the factors they have gleaned from their primary and secondary research. This student was prompted with Robert Moses, a prominent urban architecture from the 1920s to the 1970s in New York City, who developed a highway system with the bridges at 9 feet tall, not allowing the 12-foot public buses to be on the highway. In doing this, he purposely excluded Black and Brown communities from certain areas of New York City. Moses stated white people of upper and comfortable middle class would be free to use these parkways. His reasonings were put into policy, and other cities adopted the same form of urban transportation, perpetuating an invisible form of racism. The student who created this game was originally meant to teach about these bridges and the transportation system that Moses set up. However, what they ultimately created was a game that highlighted the power and privilege in our culture in the United States. This course allows students to develop designs that fit the needs of their research, not limited to a specific area of design. In this same course, students developed augmented reality, game design, and they determined new processes of approvals for design that reached the public domain, and the development of visuals that reflected systems thinking. Of course, as you would imagine, there were tensions that emerged in defining a multimodal design program in a context where other design programs were founded on specific disciplinary professional practices. If we were going to define a program as multidisciplinary, we needed to define it with a mission instead of a method of design. It was not specific to graphic design, but designed for a purpose. We encourage students to bring skills from other disciplines into the conversations with design research. The MFA emerged from the direction the undergraduate program was taking, and this was a direct response to the interests of our faculty. We changed the name of our graduate program to Design for Responsible Innovation, and this fall of 2021, will be our first cohort of graduate students who applied for an MFA in Design for Responsible Innovation. It's also exciting because our existing students chose to move from the MFA in Graphic Design to the MFA in what we call DRI, moving forward with all of our graduate students in our new program. Our interest in using the word responsible was not in the sense of a binary opposition with the notion of irresponsible, but rather as a way of engaging with questions about what happens when people design. What are the motives? What are the outcomes? How are they related? Why are we conscious of and are intentional about? How are we making sure we are continuously prompted to think critically? In order to open up a space where students could work in a manner that benefits from our faculty's research, we define responsible as a domain of intentional action that engages with design, reification, and maintenance of positive, equitable, and meaningful futures desired by sustainable networks of human and non-human actors. The boundaries of this domain are determined by topics of contemporary debate, such as sustainability, conservation, ethics, justice, equity, culture, and identity. This definition introduces a new dimension to a prevailing definition of innovation that emphasizes value generation. After we defined an ethos, we built a core sequence. The core design studio up to this point had been one MFA graphic design studio. We renamed it MFA Design for Responsible Innovation Studio and redefined the core tools that students would acquire in this course, working individually or collaboratively to establish a design research agenda. This course equips the students to situate their research in a rigorous theoretical framework, select viable methods for research and pedagogy, and engage in making in order to deliver interactive artifacts that speak for themselves. Students take this course 4 out of their 6 semesters. We also added a design research methodology seminar focused on coordinating readings and design theory and the processes and principles of human-centered design with graduate students' emerging thesis research interests. It addresses the role of design research methodology in establishing design practice and design pedagogy. Students are also asked to require to take a graduate level section of EDGE, the Ethics of a Designer in a Global Economy course I previously mentioned. This presents complex ethical problems in a design practice. Individual sections address either social or environmental issues. One last course we developed was the Design Research Impact Seminar, which is intended to help our MFA students connect their research with pedagogy and professional development strategies to disseminate their research via publishing, conferences, community outreach, and other relevant venues. We initially developed a set of research tracks with the intention of distilling our faculty's research interests. We advertised tracks in sustainable and regenerative design, urban sociology and critical race design, and visual and cultural studies. We added a 4th track called Student Proposed Applied Research and Responsible Innovation, Social Impact and Engagement, as a way of inspiring students to propose research that we would have never thought of. More recently, we have discussed the concern that these tracks may make our program appear more specific than it actually is. The tracks were a distillation of the faculty interests. However, they were limiting for students who wanted to engage with our program. We are moving to represent the scope of our program by simply listing our faculty's research interests. While the tracks made sense at the outset, we realize in a small program like ours, we don't want students to work on separate tracks. And if we started using them administratively, they would actually create boundaries where we are expressly interested in transcending. We really wanted to hear proposals that are led by our students' interests. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let my colleague, Dr. Briggs, share hers to present for the final part.
All right. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yeah, coming through perfect, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So we've decided to remove that list of tracks from our website and instead let our own research keywords be the tool that describes the scope of what we do. And the message that we want to send to prospective students is that we can support them in studying almost any topic, as long as they want to do it through the lens of design research. And I want to point out how many assistant professors appear on this list. We are a young faculty in the sense that only 3 have tenure. The rest of us are working our way through that process. I'm really happy to report that we have been really successful at recruiting a diverse cohort of MFA candidates in DRI, Design for Responsible Innovation, who come to us not just because they want to acquire design skills, but because they understand what research means and they want to conduct design research. Currently, we have 10, and the variety of their undergrad backgrounds mirrors that interdisciplinarity in our own faculty backgrounds and research interests. So this list appears in chronological order, which means that it's showing you we have 2 students who are just graduating now who came to us with undergrad degrees in graphic design. And then we have students who came from social work, architecture, journalism, engineering, and mathematics. Among our newest admits, we see another 1 coming from architecture and 2 coming from graphic design. And their thesis keywords provide more evidence that we're attracting a diverse cohort whose concerns mirror our synthetic concerns. So for example, Keenan Daly's keywords, Afrofuturism, identity, African American spirituality, ontology, systems thinking, transgenerational trauma, racial equity, and cognitive dissonance, that describes what he's concerned with. And then if we jump down, I'll just pick out Faithful Oladeji, who is working on architectural design, architecture education, human-centered design, user experience, architectural representation, and virtual reality. So these are 2 students that come from very different backgrounds. One comes from graphic design, the other comes from architecture. And they have different goals, different professional objectives, different topical areas of interest, different methodological areas of interest, but they fit well together in a program like ours. And then scanning down further, we have some incoming students. And so the second one from the bottom, it says logo and identity design, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, plus other gender and sexual orientation identities issues, graphic design, and design for social change. So again, you see a range, and there's a lot there. In addition to asking our students to share their keywords, we've also developed an interactive online tool that is meant to demonstrate the range of what's possible and really provoke the students' imagination in a way that is both more granular and more empowering than that list of research tracks has been. And so we use this to talk to students who are thinking about coming here, and we also use it to work with students once they're here. It's a tool that lives on our website, and we will share that web address with you a little bit later so that you can actually try it out. But before we do, I just want to walk through how it works. It's real simple, and yet it allows people to grapple with complex ideas. It's organized around 4 columns that contain nodes that the user can select from and draw connections among. And so starting on the left, that first column contains nodes that describe matters of concern, which I think is a term that's familiar to you all, that justify the design of improved futures. And so reading on down that list, you find nodes like impact of manufacturing and consumption, controversiality of truth, global warming and climate change, sustainable urban sociality, respect of beliefs, on down to things like opacity of accessibility, narrow social mobility and inequity, and structural racism. Matters of concern are different from matters of fact. If matters of fact are about the way things work and what currently exists, matters of concern is more about how things came to be the way they are and how they could be different, what that might be like and what it would take. And this is a distinction that Bruno Latour framed, which is really helpful for engaging design as a synthetic practice where needs are addressed by creating artifacts and systems and services whose efficacy rests in part on their communicative communicative capacity. And we could have named this column something else, like impact, but over time we found that it made sense for us to retain this sort of Latourian language. And then the nodes in the second column describe the ethical stakes that interlock to produce those matters of concern. And really, we could have put all this together in one column, but we feel it's important to make space and time for identifying the ethical stakes of any design opportunity, regardless of the terms in which the designer aims to conceptualize improved futures. And so here the user can choose among nodes like sustainability and conservation, ecology, honesty and trust, identity, infrastructures, well-being. And at this point, you might be wondering about the order in which the nodes appear, and also you might be thinking of nodes that don't appear here, and why not, or what about that? I will talk about that, but before we dig into those questions, I want to work through the next couple of columns. So this third menu presents a list of research traditions that can be used to explore ethical stakes. And so it includes nodes like systems thinking, ethnography, ethnomethodology, on down to psychoanalytic theory and human-centered design. And then finally, we come to the rightmost column, which is the first one, the only menu that is really design specific. It gathers nodes that describe design modes and methods, including participatory design, empirical interventions, interaction design, information visualization, and empathic design. And so the key here is that users can choose design modes and methods that they know well and they know they want to use, or that they really don't know so much about but would like to learn more. And when the user scrolls over any given node, a definition appears at the bottom of the screen. So this tool allows users to try ideas on for size, and in particular to search for nodes that can help them think through their concerns. And if they don't find nodes that speak to their concerns, or they just wish there was something else there, they can use the Add Node button, which allows them to add nodes in any of those 4 columns and add definitions as well. So this is a video that shows a user drawing connections among nodes, and also they're going to add a new one. And the goal with this tool is to set up a continuum that accommodates problem exploration and also problem solving. And a given student's thesis research might land anywhere along that range. Questions about whether their work is problem-focused or solution-focused really come down to how process gets established and negotiated and reported. And the concept of matters of concern and the structural model based on that concept enables students to think through multiple avenues for conducting their design research. It also helps us support and guide them in that process. The tool is not meant to be an end in itself. Again, it allows people to grapple with complex ideas, but it's not complex itself. And it exists alongside many other practical tools and intellectual frameworks for shaping research. But it does do a good job of describing the spirit and ethos of our program. And in order to show you how it works, we're going to walk through some models by 3 of our current students. Rising third year, Faithful Oladeji. His keywords are architectural design and education, human-centered design, user experience, architectural representation, and virtual reality. He's working on a protocol for using immersive media to subvert the hegemonic underpinnings of 20th and 21st century architectural practice and pedagogy. And so under matters of concern, he decided to add a node, social sustainability, which he defines as specifying and managing positive and negative impacts of systems, processes, organizations, and activities on people and social life. And he offers us a source for that. I'll show you that afterward if we want to see how those rollover functions work. Oladeji writes, sustainability is one of the main problematics in contemporary discourse on architecture and design. Sustainability is generally understood to have 3 main dimensions: economic, environmental, and social. The environmental and economic dimensions of sustainability have been amply attended to for decades, but only recently has the social dimension received similar attention. My project, I'm still quoting, my project seeks to contribute to recent efforts to reorient architectural design toward more socially sustainable practice. And so that single node then is connected to 3 nodes in the ethical stakes column, where Oladeji has selected infrastructures and well-being, and he also added a node, education, which he defines as learnings offered to future designers as change agents. He writes, I'm exploring how architecture students can be educated to more actively consider end users' physical, mental, and social well-being in the design process in order to habituate future architects to more socially sustainable approaches. And then those nodes in turn are connected to 3 nodes in the research traditions column: grounded theory, human-centered design, and a node that he added, phenomenology, defined as a form of qualitative research that studies the individual's lived experience in the world. And notice that it's not just 3 lines connecting 3 nodes in one column with 3 nodes in another, but rather there are choices that have been made. And so, for example, well-being is connected to each of the 3 nodes under research traditions, while infrastructure and education is each connected to only 2 of those 3 nodes. Oladeji writes, I'm using grounded theory as a research methodology to understand how students currently consider the impact of their design decisions on the end user's experience and well-being, and he means current architecture students. I'm also seeking to understand how a phenomenological understanding of experience can be beneficial for conceiving of how end users experience the built environment. Lastly, I'm looking at theories and practices of human-centered design to understand how this approach might enable more socially sustainable methods and processes in architecture students' processes. And if it's not implicitly obvious, HCD is not something that's been widely adopted in architectural design and pedagogy. So this is the same diagram, but with the filter button turned on. Now the research traditions nodes, those are in turn connected to the design modes and methods of modeling and simulation, interaction design, and empathic design. And whereas this student found that he wanted to add new nodes in the first 3 columns, he didn't need to add any here. He writes, I'm concerned with how designs of the built environment can be represented through modeling, and how end user interaction with the built environment can be simulated through immersive modes of representation. I'm also curious about how immersive representation can facilitate conversations about experience and enable the designer to empathize with the end user. And he concludes, my project is constantly developing as new insights emerge. So I'm keeping a working version of this model in which I can add and remove different nodes and connections periodically. So now I'm going to change to another student. This is a model prepared by a rising second year in our program, Rachel Dietges. And instead of talking through each of her nodes, I'm going to share some excerpts from her abstract. She writes, the goal of my thesis is to consider trauma and its impact on design by addressing gaps in design practice, providing suggestions for design pedagogy, and proposing a new framework for the integration of trauma-informed principles in design research methodologies. In the context of design, this exploration of trauma will demonstrate the opportunity and responsibility for designers to practice trauma-responsive design. Trauma is a matter of concern for everyone, and in some parts of the world is considered a significant public health issue. The breadth and depth of trauma can impact us at the level of the individual, relationships, communities, and society. What's more, at times it is so pervasive in how it functions, under the surface and in the shadows, that our lack of understanding can actually perpetuate harm through our design work. In this research, 6 guiding principles of a trauma-informed approach are used in building a trauma-responsive design framework. And Dietges explains that in the course of conducting her lit review, she identified readings that promote trauma literacy, relational empathy, compassion building, and analysis of non-clinical therapeutic techniques in the design research process. The anticipated significance of this study is that it will provide adaptations to current design methods and create new ones, thereby generating new knowledge on trauma-responsive design. And finally, we'll look at a model by rising second-year student Je Lo, who writes, I am studying news literacy education in communities that are vulnerable to misinformation campaigns. My research focuses on creating an inclusive and accessible news literacy resource that can benefit audiences in multicultural, multilingual, and multi-generational communities. My concerns with misinformation, social media, and social inequality are reflected in the DRI model as controversiality of truth, commodification and exploitation, reduction of agency, imbalance of power, opacity of accessibility, narrow social mobility and inequality, and structural racism. She continues, misinformation has impacted people's overall trust in the media and in government institutions. This is reflected in the DRI model under ethical stakes as honesty and trust. The consequences of misinformation and conspiracy theories reinforce social inequalities, especially among communities of color, and this is reflected under ethical stakes as justice. In our highly mediated society, social media and the internet are crucial infrastructures. Lastly, misinformation and conspiracy theories can also have an impact on individual well-being and even safety. I plan to draw, she's turning to the third column now, I plan to draw on feminist theory as one of the guiding ideologies for my research because while I'm not necessarily focusing on gender, I find the concepts of intersectionality, power structures, and inclusion very relevant and important to my research. I believe research traditions like systems thinking and ethnography can help me look at the bigger picture, while grounded theory can help me ground my findings in systematically collected, coded, and analyzed data. I also chose human-centered design as one of my research traditions because I want to ground my research and prototype in empathic understanding of audience needs. There are 4 potential design methods that I think can be beneficial: participatory design, interaction design, information visualization, and empathic design. The DRI model has helped me gain clarity and see a possible path to my complicated research topic. So that's the kind of thing we want to hear, that it really makes students feel empowered to like sink their teeth into content that otherwise might feel like it's too much to take on in the amount of time they have, or that they don't have the background in some sense. We're trying to say you can gain the background. You just need to know what you want. So Lisa's going to put some links into the chat, and we invite you to explore the online tool. You will notice, and you can see on the screen, that it includes a library of models. And if you create your own model, you can export it as a JSON file and then re-import it anytime you want. So you can make it, and then you can come back and work on it by re-importing it. Or you can send us your JSON file, and then we can add it to our library of models. And that way you can share it with other people and also continue to work with it without having to re-import. And so in conclusion, we just want to share a few thoughts about where we see our program headed. One exciting direction that Professor Mercer is leading on is establishing a Design for Responsible Innovation think tank, which will allow undergrads in our graphic design program and graduate students in our Design for Responsible Innovation program to collaborate on a wide variety of projects, from community-sourced design challenges to the graduate students' thesis research. We're also in the middle stages of founding a PhD program in Design for Responsible Innovation, and we are thoughtful about negotiating scale in everything we do. So even though we're seeing, as Professor Mercer mentioned, rapid growth in our undergrad numbers, we're really committed to maintaining our grad cap at about 10 so that we can ensure quality mentorship of individual students. And finally, we see this framework of matters of concern as a model for thinking across disciplinary boundaries, not just within our program, but it absolutely is doing that for us within our program, but also within the School of Art and Design, which contains, again, this wide array of disciplines, as we mentioned, and across our campus, because with the new hub in the form of the Siebel Center I think can help us do all of that work. And so with that, we would both like to say thank you for inviting us to be here with you today. And we've really only scratched the surface, so we're eager for your comments and questions and some conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much for that really enlightening presentation. And there is so much that we could talk about and where to begin. I'll open it up to members of the audience to ask questions in just a minute. Feel free to post any questions into the chat or stick your digital arm up and I'll come to you. But as I'm hosting, I'm going to go first. Sorry, it's just one of those things. I was wondering. I was just wondering about the reception that that this initiative had when it was kind of first started to be spoken about at the institution, and whether it was something that got very easy support, or actually whether it was quite a complicated thing to negotiate and launch. It's clearly, in my view, a really, really fantastic initiative, and there's some deep kind of expertise that underpins it. I think it's terrific. But I am interested in about the institutional challenges or the disciplinary challenges that you might have had in just getting to where you are.
I think that's a really fair question, and we sort of allude to it a bit in the beginning of the presentation. There was tension absolutely between the different design programs and trying to figure out how do we make a move away from those traditional practices of graphic design into that more contemporary practice. And I think ultimately the reason we decided to name it Design for Responsible Innovation is because of that tension, is because we needed to find a way to truly reflect what we were doing without being able to use the word design in and of itself. And so I think there's always like a continuing way of working together as well. I mean, we're still trying to figure out how to work together in classes or in the development of other graduate level programs that Molly can speak more specifically to, because she's helping develop them as well, at the same time supporting what we have going on. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but just out of respect of our colleagues, I don't want to go into any details.
No,
but yes,
that's okay.
Tensions.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and that's I think that's a good response. Thank you. I've two other questions. One is about kind of your identity. When people ask, do you say, you know, I'm a graphic designer, or I'm a design researcher in graphic design? How do you kind of self-identify, and do you just say, I am a responsible innovation designer, or, you know, how do you self-identify or label what you do?
Molly, do you want to go first? I've heard it hates you.
Sure, we'll take turns. It is complicated, and it would be complicated even if we were still a master's program in graphic design, because the program has done things like hire people who have complicated identities. And so my PhD is landscape architecture, history, and theory. And I'm a studio artist who's very committed to visual communication, but that's already a complicated answer. So, I mean, it just depends on who I'm talking to and what it is that they need to know. But in the simplest sense, I'm a design historian and theorist and practitioner.
Fantastic. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question ready that they'd like to put to our speakers? I can see Justine nodding her head. You've not got your digital hand up, but go for it.
I do.
You do now. You do now.
I already clicked on it. I guess I'm not sure if it's a question or if it's more like I just like your point of view on it. But I think it's fantastic to have a course on design for responsible innovation. But and you've talked about, like, you know, the next step further down the line and the think tank and all this kind of thing. And I just wonder if you don't think that design for responsible innovation should be underpinning every design course within your school, well, even our school, you know, at Northumbria. I just wonder, like, your thought on that, because I think as designer we have a huge responsibility anyway, and it should be everyone who is trained in that way. So yeah, I would just like your thoughts on it.
Well, I would say that it sort of does run as a common thread through many of our courses, but it's truly a reflection of the faculty and our own research interests and how we incorporate it in our own ways. And so, well, I don't know if it needs to be specifically called like a responsible social innovation. I do think it's a design-led, because when we were talking initially, when you had invited us to this, you were using words like strategic, and you had a few other words that you're using that I thought, oh, I could really see how even just using a slightly different frame could really support a different way of thinking in a specific class. And so I do think if we were too specific, we would almost do ourselves a disservice, right? And so maybe making courses that are within the same vein of thought. And Molly, I'd be curious to what your your response would be?
It's a really good question, and it's a really key observation that what does it say about the field if we're calling that term out, right? And so, just going back to the earlier question about the emergence of the very concept of such a program, we would have liked to call ourselves design, but it was also really important to many programs on our campus to continue to do what they do incredibly well, which is define the scope of their practice professionally, right? And so we needed to define the scope of our program more on the basis of mission instead of profession. So as an aside, a student that comes to us, they might really want to go on to work in UI UX design. And they can do that if they just choose to take on UI UX methods, right? And then they gain skills. But it's going to be in the service of some kind of research. Now, hold on. I love it when this happens. I want to brain. The naming of the program, Design for Responsible Innovation, is really about asserting criticality. And we couldn't say design for social change or design for sustainability because we do both. There are amazing programs that do either of those things, but we needed to capture the fact that we have faculty that are committed to both of those issues, and also that we think both critically and kind of synthetically about how those things work together. So we just made up our mind that we were going to go for it and assert criticality in the very construction of the program. Sorry to go on so long.
That's great. Thank you both for your answers there. Helen's posted a question in the chat. Helen, do you want to speak up and ask it?
Hi, yes, I really love that the model is tailorable and customizable by the people using it, and I wondered whether you've got any plans to look at how it's being adapted and to build future iterations of it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure if there was a lag. I would say, we initially had developed different layouts with the different tracks that we had mentioned, but we found that it was almost too specific. And ultimately, what we were really trying to do was create a way that we could have a conversation where we were speaking the same language as well. Because what we didn't want students to feel like they were sort of like imposters coming into their own program and not knowing the language to speak to the faculty. And so it did provide a sense of that as well. It is customizable. I don't know that we showed how to use a node, or did we show? Oh, I did show how to add a node within that video. So it is customizable to a point. You're not able to add like another column right now. However, we don't see it beginning at a certain column. We see that you could start at any column that makes most sense for you or where your interest is, and then start from that specific column. So I think the way of using it could be specific to you, and really the only way of completely customizing it at this moment is to add the nodes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just to add to that, there are some improvements we know we want to make, like we're continuing to build out the definitions. When you roll over a given node, the definition appears on the bottom of the screen. And some of those are, sourced from not the most thoughtful places. So that's a way in which we can continue to build it. Another important piece is building out the library of models. And that's ongoing. I can imagine focusing on it as a design problem and really elaborating it, but I don't know that any of us are thinking, oh, I'm going to take that on right now. We just right now are using it as like a little trowel to get conversations started. And so when I'm working with grads, they often get to the point where they can't go any further with it. It got them started on something, and now there's other things they want to represent. And so then they just go and they design graphics instead. Like the tool allows them to say certain things, and they design graphics that go with it. Because, for example, the lines, if you want to connect a node on the first column and the third column, I forget if there's a bug that allows you to do that, but it's not supposed to allow you to do that. If you can do it, it still looks messy. And so then you're at a point where, the logic you're exceeding the logic of the tool as it's been defined. And so if you want to show us something else, you just draw it yourself,
Thank you.
There are also 3 versions as it stands right now. So if you look at the library of models, if you're on the link, it shows the DIY model of 2019, 2020, and 2021. And it will show you how we have been very iterative in our learning, in our expectations of, when we're working with students, what did we get wrong on the last mile? I don't know if it's wrong, but what improvements can we make, like Molly said? And so we do show the different iterations if you'd like to see where we started at.
Yes, and to that point, the newest one has, I think, or the last summer, we put in a node for structural racism because we realized that if you want to talk about that, you have to select all the nodes in the left-hand column. And once you've done that, then there's too many connections for the diagram to be meaningful anymore. It just was like turning into a mess. And so add a new node, and all of a sudden it's clean and clear again.
So I know I know there's a couple of my current master's students on this call who are about to begin a project with me that's kind of loosely termed Design for Social Justice, and I guess I would hope and encourage them to think about how they might use this tool and develop a map as we progress with our collaborators. So it would be quite different to the way that some of your students have used it to date, in that in that project I'm bringing together organisations who look after prison services in our region, a police force, the kind of the policy and commissioning office of the force, the National Health Service mental health trusts, and some charities that look at mental health, homelessness, and sheltered accommodation. And my students will be working with that constellation of organisations to think about how they understand escalating vulnerabilities of members of the public that interact with their services, and it'll be interesting to think about how that tool might develop if we were to populate it with our work with those organisations. So we promise we will publish and share with you our map as we create it, because I think that would be an interesting and a different way of perhaps constructing it.
Oh, absolutely, because it does the same thing where it bridges that gap of communication and language that we use. And also what it might do is it might, I don't know if prove is the right word, but show why you're doing things in a specific way and help your clients or people that you're working with or collaborating with even further of like why this needs to be done. So I'm excited to hear that. It's really...
Yeah, I think there's some quite positive things about it, because in the same way that you described, well, actually, it is a tool, and it's a tool that helps your students kind of conceptualize the complexity that they're trying to address and respond to, and I think it's really valuable to that. And I think when we've got in the network that I and my students will be working with, again, there's quite a lot of complexity just in the actors involved, and this is a tool that helps us build a common language and a common conceptualization. Could be quite a productive thing. So I'm quite interested to see it in action. Does anyone else have a question that they would like to put to Lisa or Molly? It's a little bit quiet at the moment. One of the things that I wanted to ask is just in your contexts, if there was one thing that you could abolish that might enhance responsible innovation, what would it be? I know that's an abstract question, but
I think Molly, if you want to go first, you're welcome to. But I have something that's short.
Go right ahead.
Okay. I was just in a meeting where we were talking about community partnerships with our university, and they were talking about like the 4 key things that they wanted to show the community so that they could say, see, look, well, we're going to be amazing to work with. And this is a really great initiative that they came up with. But one of the bullet points was that all of the community, all of the people who were coming from the university would bring the knowledge with them. And I think that idea that we are the only ones that hold knowledge is just sort of, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I said, there are experts in the community as well. We are not the only experts in the room. And so I think that acknowledgement of like, who is the expert and who should be leading the projects, I think that's something that I would consider doing away with, as well as structural racism, but outside of that.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, structural racism, absolutely. But the other point also is important. And I was also in a meeting yesterday where we were talking about whether the institution should develop a structural component that holds innovation as a capability for the institution. And within that, they were talking about knowledge exchange and this kind of central premise of a university as a vehicle for knowledge exchange. And it was still surprising to me that they were conceptualizing that as a kind of a one-way channel, that the university has the knowledge and exchanges it with industry or community. I'm like, well, what about, knowledge generation? What about genuine knowledge sharing? What about... And there was a lot of people in suits around the table that looked at me and went, and it's, kind of like, well, our authoritative position is one of, we are the knowledge holders, and that's what we get paid to. You're like, well, it's a complicated world out there, and actually there's all sorts of things that people are expert in and that we can learn and share and generate by working together. So actually, I think that idea of what one-way knowledge transactions is something that should be abolished, and actually there is a much more sophisticated position that should emerge in its place. Molly, what about you?
Well, the thought that came to my mind when you asked that question, I think dovetails with what you've both just said, which is I would like to abolish the expectation of easy answers. In so many ways, I think one of the reasons it's hard to be a graduate student is the sense of self-doubt. And I think that self-doubt comes in because you expect that the answer shouldn't be this hard, or that I should already know more than I do in order to take this on. And so if you don't expect easy answers, then all of a sudden it's okay to not know and to think out loud in real time. And I think that concept just really, again, dovetails with what you both just said, that the university isn't the holder of the knowledge, it's the medium for formulating knowledge, crafting knowledge, creating knowledge, and also creating discourse around it so that it can move and not just be held.
Yeah, I think that's a really good provocative thought, and for me it's really interesting in some of the broader discussions about design and design history and the role of design within society, and particularly, I guess, in kind of commerce, and a lot of I think a lot of power and influence has been given to design as a disciplinary subject for its ability to solve problems. But as the situations that we engage with and the types of matters of concern that we hope to affect are increasingly complex, then we really must make sure that we don't oversimplify the types of topics and subjects and complexity that we seek to engage. And that will mean that there are no simple answers, that there is not a golden bullet. And, and actually, our ability to engage and even possibly just positively agitate a situation may be a positive outcome, and the idea of trying to solve something like structural racism or any of the other matters of concern that you listed is kind of just a fallacy of poor logic, probably. So I think that's a really good one, Molly.
The very idea of calling our program Design for Responsible Innovation, the risk of that is being understood as offering a simple answer. And of course, what we really mean by it is doing design in a way where you're thinking critically about the systems or the services or the artifacts that you're proposing or that you're critiquing or that you're intervening on, and grappling with consequences, at multiple scales at the same time. Like that's what we might mean by responsible. And so if we say that we want to step away from any expectation of easy answers, the only way to do that is to spend a lot of time. I mean, we have to have conversations about what our program is, and conversations about why we have these faculty like these, and it's not quick. None of it's quick.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because I think this notion of time and pace is can be really complicated. So I think there is a growing recognition, and the sorts of things that you're doing and talking about, I think, resonate with a growing recognition that we need to be embedded for periods of time. If we're going to seek to make any positive influence, we need to be embedded within communities and within situations, and it will take time to influence them. And yet there is still also a growing recognition of rapid design interventions. And I know that Justine, who's on this call, her PhD study is about those sorts of rapid interventions. And and I just wondered, Justine, do you have a point of view about how rapid interventions might interact with these more complex, difficult, slow to change social systems, or is the rapidity only relevant within commercial contexts? What do you think, Justine?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, Friday afternoon.
No, I do think actually that they can trigger some really interesting conversation. And yes, it's rapid, but it doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. And I think it all depends on the way you frame this intervention. And that's why I think your tool actually might be really helpful, in figuring what is it that I'm trying to do, and towards what do I want to work. And I think that, I think rapid doesn't mean meaningless. And I think it's just a case of how us as designer, when we are facilitating those kind of activity, like what language are we using, like making sure that the participants of such intervention are considering those kind of issues whilst they are going through the process.
Yeah, so Justine, that that brings me to the thing that I would probably abolish, which is kind of binary thinking, that it's that it's one or the other, that we go fast or we go slow, or that we're social or we're commercial. And actually, I would abolish that notion of binary thinking, because it isn't one or the other. It is often that these things can merge and intermix in all sorts of interesting and complicated ways. So yeah, not a bad answer, Justine, for Friday afternoon. What would anybody else abolish that's on the talk? If you were to enhance, a responsible approach within your own context, is there something that you would abolish? Oh, everyone's being very, very shy. Very shy.
I think I'm thinking. While they're thinking, I have to say, I love the idea of abolishing the binary. Oh my goodness, that is something that I feel like I have to remind students and my collaborators about. Like even just in the idea of using responsible, we really had to actively promote that we were not saying that everyone else on campus was being irresponsible. Yeah. And we were like, how did we even create that binary? How did that happen? And so that's a great one. I
know, it's almost like, the minute you say something, you've created a binary. And actually, I think that's the way that language works a little bit as well. Or certainly our language. There may be other languages that it's more subtle, but it can be really problematic really quickly. So yeah, I know, Brogan is also on this call. He's due to be beginning a PhD with us next September, and some of his work is looking at how design research can have a greater impact within policymaking processes and practices. And again, it'll be interesting to see whether the sort of tool that we've been shown this afternoon would be relevant as you're trying to plot out your own research methodology and journey.
No, yeah, definitely. I remember because you shared this a few weeks ago.
I did, yes.
Sorry, in one of the sessions, and I did look at it, and I was reading the paper along with it. I've made some notes somewhere, so I will go back to them and have a look before I start.
Excellent, good. Well, I want to give this opportunity, this kind of final opportunity, to ask Lisa or Molly if there are any kind of closing remarks or thoughts that they'd like to share with the group, and then I'll join this, draw this session to a close and thank you formally. So are there any kind of final thoughts or comments you'd like to make?
I just want to ask, I haven't seen any paper. Is it possible to get it somewhere?
Yeah, if you go to the institutional webpage, there's a link to the paper there, or if you ask me, I'll send it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Looking forward to reading it.
It's a good one. Lisa, Molly?
I'll just thank you for the opportunity to talk about this work and our program.
Great.
Yeah, we will keep following what you all are doing there. There's just a lot of wonderful synergy here. And if there's a way in the future that we could do something together, we want to do something together. For example, we could have a session where students present to one another.
I think that would be excellent. I think there's lots of fairly straightforward things that we can do, and I think there's some interesting, complicated ones we could also have a go at as well. You've been wonderful speakers, and the content that you shared has been really thought-provoking, and I will probably rewatch the video to make sure that I didn't miss too much of it. But thank you so much for your generosity and the time, and not only in delivering this, but in clearly preparing for it as well. So thank you very much, and enjoy your weekend when you get to it.
Will do. You enjoy your weekend. It's about to start, right?
It is. Yeah, it's not far off it. So bring this session to a close, and just to remind you that the next seminar takes place on June 18th, 9 o'clock UK time, 10 o'clock Central European Summer Time, and the focus will be design for humanitarian and international development. So I look forward to seeing you then if I don't see you before. Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Good weekend.
Thank you.